Hello and welcome to this News9 special. I'm Verghese Abraham. In 1985, Air India 182 was bombed by Khalistani terrorists. It killed 329 passengers. 38 years later, that is almost 4 decades later, will Canada let history repeat?
Hi Shannon, Air India 182, good morning.
Air India 182, good morning. Squawk to 2005, cleared for London. Air India 182, Shannon. Air India 182, Shannon. Air India 182, Shannon.
I'm Sanjay Lazar. I lost my entire family in the Air India 182 Kanishka. This is, the story of my life. I failed my 12th standard, and that happened in June of 1985. And we were all to go on a holiday to Toronto, and I got my results 2 days before our departure, and they wanted to cancel their trip. The shock and horror of me failing upset my family no end. My dad didn't want to go. My stepmom didn't want to go. I said, no, please go. And I'll submit my papers for evaluation and I'll stay behind. It's only 10 or 12 days. It's not that I'm a 3-year-old child or something like that. My dad was obviously the in-flight supervisor. He worked in Air India for 24 years before that, and he was operating that flight along with a lot of friends, and they were all taking their families along.
5,000 years of elegant living with it, George's mind took off as well.
Air India 182, a Boeing 747 named after Emperor Kanishka, was on its way to London's Heathrow after a brief stop at the Mirabel Airport in Montreal, Canada. Carrying 329 passengers and 22 crew members, the flight had originated in Toronto and would make stop at London before embarking on its final journey to Delhi and Mumbai. It had barely entered Irish airspace when Air India 182 suddenly disappeared from the radar.
There was a loud explosion and the whole plane just vanished.
Where the air traffic controller at Shannon Airport in Ireland, as the plane approached the Irish coast on its way to Heathrow, as he tries to get hold of 182, and he says, 182, Shannon.
182, Shannon. Air India 182, Shannon.
You have him on radio? No. Negative, came the answer.
329 people died, out of which 268 were Canadian citizens, mostly of Indian origin. There were also 24 Indian nationals.
One guy actually came and said, my condolences, I'm sorry. And that's when it struck me, that something may be wrong. I was not going for, to locate them or meet them. I was going to, bring bodies back.
They didn't even have a speck on the radar. The plane was blown to pieces.
But what exactly happened to Air India 182 and why? The answer lies in India's Operation Blue Star.
Khalistani radical Bhindranwale turns Golden Temple into a fortress.
Indian Army brings in tanks, clears Golden Temple of radicals.
4 months after Operation Blue Star, PM Indira Gandhi assassinated.
Barely a year after Operation Blue Star and nearly 7 months after Indira Gandhi's assassination, Sikh terror outfit Babbar Khalsa was baying for India's blood to seek revenge for the killing of Bhindranwale.
50,000 तो उत्ते नौजवान शहीद हो चुका है। खालिस्तान जिंदाबाद बढ़ के रहेगा। खालिस्तान फिर से बदला।
And this time, their target was the very Maharaja of Indian skies, Air India. The plan was to bomb 2 Air India passenger aircrafts simultaneously in 2 parts of the world, in London's Heathrow Airport and Japan's Narita Airport, which could have caused an uproar and brought global attention to the Khalistani issue.
But the one that was intended to be loaded onto another Air India plane when it reached Japan at Tokyo Airport, Narita Airport near Tokyo, that got jostled by the baggage handlers as they moved it to the Air India plane. And it blew up, killed 2 baggage handlers and severely injured 4 others.
Kanishka, Air India 182, was delayed by 97 minutes out of Toronto and Montreal. Had it not been delayed, this aircraft would have landed at Heathrow. So they would have plotted to blow up 2 aircrafts on ground with passengers at 2 airports, very busy airports. Imagine the destruction. So it was a well thought out, carefully planned operation. There is no doubt that the Canadians messed up big time. They had recordings of one guy telling the other guy, we are preparing a bomb, literally.
Air India had sent a telex to the Canadian police authorities saying that there is a possibility of luggage, the explosives carried with time device in the luggage. So please check all the baggage of all Air India flights leaving from Canada.
That telex arrived at a bored RCMP station in Toronto. They said, oh, here go the Indians again. Yet another complaint and warnings. They're just trying to get more free security, they said. They claimed they conveyed it to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, but in fact they did not.
That led to an appointment of, in 1986, I think, Justice Krupal Commission.
They went in the first year and they investigated, and they came to the distinct conclusion it was a bomb and there was no question about it. And by all accounts, it matched the bomb that was exploded in Narita.
Canadian people went on arguing that this has nothing to do with the bomb. This is something to do with your aircraft, maintenance. When Mrs. Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister, she requested the then Canadian Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, that is the father of Justin Trudeau, the present Prime Minister, to extradite Talvinder Singh Parmar, who had killed 2 police officers. He was in charge of the Babbar Khalsa in Punjab. Surprisingly, the senior Trudeau, who was the Prime Minister at that time, he said that the evidence is not adequate to extradite him to India.
Canada is back to shielding the same Khalistanis who were responsible for the killing of dozens of Canadians during the Kanishka bombing. Over the last decade, Canada has rejected 26 extradition requests for Khalistani terrorists received from India. Sikh terrorists have also received political support and Canadian security to conspire freely against India.
The Canadian Intelligence Agency certainly knew that Talvinder Parmar was a threat, and they knew very significantly that 3 weeks before the bombing, he had gone into the woods. He had made a trip over to see a friend of his, Inderjit Singh Rayat, the bomb maker, to test an explosion.
Now, where on earth do you see 2 militants going out into a forest to test fire a bomb and intelligence agents following him into the bomb test firing?
And they heard a loud explosion. But they didn't do anything about it.
And within 10 days or 15 days of the test firing of the bomb, my life was destroyed.
Talvinder Parmar and Ajab Singh Bagri had been to visit a prominent Gurdwara near the airport in Toronto. People who heard them were told not to fly on Air India as it would be unsafe to do so.
38 years later, designated Khalistani terrorist Gurpatwant Singh Pannu of Sikhs for Justice has copied the Babbar Khalsa model of intimidation and issued fresh threats.
सिख पंथ वालिओ 19 नवंबर तो बाद एयर इंडिया च सफर नहीं करना, जान नूं खतरा हो सकदा है।
And they were able to figure out pretty quickly who bombed Air India. What they couldn't do was come up with evidence. In the course of time, bizarrely, they erased the original wiretaps. They kept erasing them after the bombing, after they knew that the person on those tapes, Parmar, was the #1 suspect.
15 years after the bombing, in the year 2000, the RCMP arrested Vancouver-based businessmen Ripudaman Singh Malik and Ajay Singh, a mill worker from British Columbia, on a number of charges, including mass murder and conspiracy. 5 years later, both were acquitted due to the factual errors and credibility issues with the witnesses.
Yes, and I remember, that day, like it was yesterday, I lost my entire family all over again sitting in that courtroom. These guys were smirking at us because they obviously knew they'd threatened and killed everybody who could give witness against them.
This particular trial went on for 20 years. It is one of the longest trial proceedings with no sort of conclusive evidence about it. So because of that particular reason, in 2006, a commission under Justice John Major was appointed.
The next thing is the intelligence agencies wanted to hide what had been hidden for 20 years. Now, mind you, in those 20 years, nobody knew that they had tracked the bomb. Nobody knew that they had tracked the bomb maker. Nobody knew that they had recordings of these guys talking about it. CSIS sent redacted messages, recordings, files to the judge, and he resigned. He said, "I'm walking out of this." When he got all the unredacted files, that's when the story came out.
So he said that this particular policy was to protect them from any finding that the liability or obligation to compensate the families of the victim. They knew very well that something had gone wrong, and then they protected their own, the Prime Minister's office and others.
The police dropped the ball, the intelligence officers dropped the ball, and the politicians dropped the ball.
Nearly 4 decades after the Kanishka terror attack, Canada should have learned its lessons. Yet, Justin Trudeau is walking a tightrope, shielding and sheltering Khalistani terrorists. The big question remains, will Canada let another Kanishka terror plot explode?
We slip into a short break now. On the other side, we have a powerful panel of guests to discuss on this very issue.
Yes, the scale of the attack surprised us.
When you get a series of alerts, 16 intelligence alerts, if Maharashtra government at that time had alerted the Coast Guard and the Navy, this 2611 would not have happened at all.
And one of the details they had planned was to use these dhagas to mislead the investigative agencies.
All this was to be presented as a Hindu terror.
So it was a Pakistan operation. The LET was the front end.
the attacks were on, it was clear that they were planned and launched from Pakistani territory.
For all of those victims of terror that was exported from Pakistan over the years, including but not limited to 2611.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back. This is the big story that we have been tracking, and it is about the bombing of Air India 182. Almost 4 decades after that bombing, what is the lessons that India should be careful about, and at the same time, the question about whether Canada is preparing the ground for another one. Joining us is Sanjay Lazar, Kanishka bombing victim skin and aviation expert. We are also joined in by Yogesh Gupta, ambassador and former Indian diplomat. We are also joined in by Bharat Kannad, Emeritus Professor, National Security Studies, CPR, and Major General retired Ashwini Sivach, Defence and Geopolitics expert. Let me go first to Sanjay Lazar, the person who has been following this story relentlessly because he had a huge personal tragedy in this. And what is it, Sanjay Lazar, that we are looking at right now when it comes to Canada? When it comes to the issue of Khalistani terrorists, there is no proper closure for the Kanishka bombing, and we are seeing the same radical grounds being readied in Canada for a possibility of another one. Are you aghast about it?
First of all, thank you for having me on your channel. Yes, there is no closure for, families of 331 victims of both bombings, because all the perpetrators have really not been punished. They escaped. And yes, Canada, failed us in the criminal trial, failed us prior to the bombing, during the trial. After the trial, we fought and got the John Major inquiry instituted. As families, we petitioned, and sadly in the years after that, they've not implemented what John Major even suggested. A lot of that still still remains to be implemented. I can see that in the meantime the world seems to have forgotten the Air India 182 Kanishka bombing, because the Khalistani groups have become a diplomatic power within the Canadian government. They support the current government politically, their supporters, and they've become a lobbying force. They've used a different route this time, and now they are presenting themselves as, they've got one wing that handles their dirty tricks, and there's another wing that looks after their political angle. And that's how they're in a position of influence. Today they're controlling the government, and which is why Canada has become, pro-radical. Actually, it's almost pro-radical, and you can see that by the statements of Panoon and earlier Niger, and the way they keep talking about, blowing up Indian targets, blowing up Indian airlines, aircrafts, and stuff like that.
Well, let me get in Ambassador Yogesh Gupta now. Ambassador Yogesh Gupta, when we in the media try to track what is happening in Canada, there is a big kind of a concern. And when it comes to Canada, it is this, that the institutions of Canada is being hijacked by Khalistanis to put out their voice. And it looks like the Canadian government is unable to do anything about it, in fact. And this is the cause of worry. The institutions of that country are being hijacked by them. And no matter how, as Sanjay was also pointing out, they become a political force. So now you don't deal with Khalistanis, you're actually dealing with the Canadians who are actually Khalistanis. So this conundrum, how do you think the Indian diplomatic corps could address this?
Well, Mr. Varghese, you are absolutely right. I think the problem is not only the Khalistani groups. The bigger problem is that the Trudeaus, both the father and the son, they have been, their governments have been deeply involved on the side of these Khalistani extremists or separatists. And now we have even begun to suspect that it's not only Canada, it's some elements in the US establishment also, who are trying to provide a certain amount of support to Canada. Because the way the United States has come out in support of these Khalistani elements, whether it was a question of eavesdropping on our diplomats in Ottawa, or it's a question of how they have supported this Pannu fellow and how they kind of got this Nikhil Gupta traced down in Czech Republic and got him quickly down, and the way they are supporting him. So it seems that the conspiracy is much bigger. So it's not just a question of Khalistanis. I think it's a much bigger conspiracy.
Well, you think it's a much bigger conspiracy. We have with us Bharat Karnar, Emeritus Professor, National Security Studies, CPR. How do you see, we have a history of Khalistani movement in the country, but when you see the growth of the Khalistani movement out of the country, I mean outside in countries like US or in Canada or in Australia, or even to that matter when it comes to UK as well, when you see the growth of these extremist actions that are, or factions that are growing up in these countries, one of the significant aspects that points out to it is that they are in fertile ground. The native governments of those countries are not taking action to this. So when we see this kind of growth, one thing that we see is that there is money coming in because most of them are contributing to that cause. They are also radicalizing the community in those places and acting against India's interests as well. So when you see this growth of Khalistan that's happened outside the country, do you think that it is a matter of time before they actually try to have it in the country itself, within the country itself? They go ahead and press the button to push another Khalistani 2.0 kind of a situation?
Look, for starters, you talked about the financing. The financing doesn't come so much from individual contributors as from the so-called gurdwaras run by these Khalistanis. So the people that give in, their deeds to the Gurdwara in terms of, devotion and so on, is then collected and used for these nefarious purposes by these Khalistanis. And of course, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and CSIs and the intelligence and police wings of Canada are a joke. They are something like the Keystone Cops. They don't know what's happening under their noses. So they can't be relied on. The thing that has happened, I think that has perhaps changed their perspective somewhat, the Khalistanis' perspective, those living abroad and making political capital out of being in safe havens, that they think are safe havens, is that the Indian government is now far more, shall we say, seriously on the ball in tracking their possessions and properties in Punjab and elsewhere, keeping surveillance on their contacts, seeing how the money flows are monitored, and generally letting these guys know that they'll be able to do nothing in Punjab. Whether they want to carve out a Khalistan out of Canada, that's a wonderful thing. I think there's a lot of space there, and they should attempt to do it. And you have the Trudeaus and these guys who are habitual sympathizers of Khalistan for purely political purposes in terms of gaining them votes and nothing else. They don't give a fig for Khalistan as such, except insofar as it helps them win elections. That said, I think there is less than no chance that there'll be a resurgence of Khalistan movement in Indian Punjab, because I think we'll take care of business at this end. And it's a bit rich for the US regarding Panun or for the Canadians vis-a-vis all these Khalistani extremists to claim that they are, they are mere democracies and keeping up their democratic traditions and looking after their citizenry and so on and so forth. I mean, the US has been #1 in assassinations abroad, including, if I may just remind people, and this was confessed by the person who planted the bomb in the Air India Flight 101 Mumbai-Geneva that killed Dr. Homi Bhabha, if you recall, in February 1965. The chap who put it there was the Assistant Director of Clandestine Operations, CIA, and he confessed it in a book, of all things. It's all there. Now, if you're not going to own up to these kind of things, then you're going to lecture us for this alleged, obviously with fake evidence. I mean, who cannot create such fakery in terms of imagery, in terms of electronic intelligence and so on? And there's no better than CIA, and the CIA helping out the Canadians with this sort of fake evidence. So first of all, I think the government of India, I think, will come up with obvious conclusions in their investigations that there's absolutely nothing to it, that this is all a bit of a hooey from the Canadian government and the American government. There is no evidence in any way connecting any Indian official to anything that happens in Canada, and that they should begin really seriously surveilling and monitoring the activities of terrorists who mean India harm. And so that is something that's the message that should be sent across. And I think Panood and all these other baseline terrorists have now got the message, I think, that they cannot, they can sort of hide, but they cannot escape the denouement that's going to see them if they act up in India. They will not do so here. As I've written again, these should be encouraged to carve out a Khalistan out of British Columbia or someplace and be happy there, or Australia, or wherever these guys are, and never think, even imagine coming back to India to create trouble, because then that's going to mean trouble for them, not just for the relatives and their families in Punjab, but for them. And they should be aware. It doesn't mean that we do it. Is the Sikh community itself in all these places that are divided. Many are very nationalist Sikhs who do not like what's happening, the capture by these small minority Khalistanis of Gurdwaras to finance their nefarious causes and so on.
Right.
So that's the sort of thing that we have to keep in mind.
Right, Professor. We'll have to just slip into a short break. After the break, we will come to Major General retired Ashwini Savach. That's after the break.
Yes, the scale of the attack surprised us.
When you get a series of alerts, 16 intelligence alerts, if Maharashtra government at that time had alerted the Coast Guard and the Navy, this 2611 would not have happened at all.
And one of the details they had planned was to use these dhagas to mislead the investigative agencies.
All this was to be presented as a Hindu terror.
So it was a Pakistan operation. The LET was the front end.
As the attacks were on, it was clear that they were planned and launched from Pakistani territory.
For all of those victims of terror that was exported from Pakistan over the years, including but not limited to 2611.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Today, she is the only smiling leader in Rajasthan. All eyes will be on her moves if the BJP returns to power.
Vasundhara Raje Scindia defied all the odds to become the first woman chief minister of Rajasthan.
She has the uncanny ability of striking rapport with all sections. That's why she is very popular in her constituency, not only in her constituency but in entire Rajasthan.
This and more, streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
It was my 14th birthday.
On birthday, daughter waits
for missing father.
He was carrying a cake for his daughter.
49-year-old Birmingham-based
Indian diplomat vanishes.
He was grabbed and bundled into a car by four assailants.
KLA claims responsibility, demands Kashmiri separatists.
Makbul Bhatt's release.
गोली मारो और फेंक दो.
And within 3 days, they shot him dead.
Abducted diplomat.
Found murdered in Leicestershire.
I said, who ordered to kill him? To me, he said, yes, I ordered it.
And he never came home.
Stop searching, start streaming. Download the world's first news OTT, News9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
Welcome back. We are now in fact joined in by Major General retired Ashwini Sawaj, defense and geopolitics experts as well. Major General, one thing that we have seen about Kanishka bombing is that it gave the idea that Indians abroad are not safe. Now, and Sanjay Lazar also will point to the fact that it's not only Indian citizens, Indian origin citizens in various countries are also being targeted. So, for me, the biggest question over here was that there were Canadian citizens of Indian origin who died in that plane crash. And even that did not stop the Canadian government from going ahead and having a full-blown investigation. But nothing came out of it. Their own citizens, if you go by the passport, had died and there was no proper answers given to them. They knew the same extremists who were holding the same citizenship were there, but they did not take action. When it comes to strategic affairs, how much can we protect Indian Indian origin citizens in their native countries or their adopted countries as well? Because that seems being one of the strategies followed by them to target Indian origin citizens as well.
Absolutely. See, Varghese, things have changed. Very rightly, you brought out what happened in 1985, and Justin Trudeau, father was there, Pierre Trudeau, no proper inquiry was conducted. And when we have pointed out Talvinder Singh Parmar, he was involved, he must be extradited, but he was never sent back. And the people who died were mainly the Canadian citizens, but they were of Indian origin, about 268. And also 27 were Britishers and 24 were actually Indian. So the question comes is that why did the Canadian government did not take any action against all these Khalistani terrorists that point of time? Now, 2-3 things emerged out it. The Pierre Trudeau again was very weak, like the present Prime Minister of Canada, and he was involved in getting the favor from Khalistani terrorists in Canada itself. And now what is happening is the present government is a minority government of Liberal Party, and it has got a support of New Democratic Party of Jagmeet Singh, which is a Khalistani activist and supporter. And therefore, Justin Trudeau is doing what he's doing. But the point is now the government has changed, and you find that we are not a soft nation. We are no more a soft nation. We can dictate terms with whether it is US, whether it is Canada, whether it is UK or Germany. We now, whatever we say, it makes a difference in the world. We are the 5th largest economy, 4th largest military power, and we have given them a no uncertain terms warning to the Americans and the Canadians. If you allow your soil to be used against anti-India sentiment, the relationship between both the countries are not going to be same. And since the US and India are strategic partner, and US knows that India is a very important country in Indo-Pacific, I'm sure once FBI Director Christopher Roy has come. He has been told by the director NIA Dinkar Gupta that you cannot allow your soil to be used by a GS Pannoon for anti-India activity. At the same time, we are also communicating to the Canadian government. And Canadian government, you know, whatever Canadian government keep on saying, we are no involvement in Hardeep Singh Nijjar killing because they have no credible evidence. But we have given us mind to them that we have capability and capacity to do anything if they will allow their soil to be used against India and Indian origin citizen. I suppose that point is very much clear because India is the economical hub center as well as a military power. And we have told them, if you want a free trade agreement, especially Canada, then you have to play to the tune which India is telling. You cannot allow such activity to take place. And these are your citizens. You are supposed to take action. And another thing which India has done it, that we have cut the roots of these terrorists from Punjab. Their property has been confiscated. They will not be given visa to come here. Their family will not able to go there. So they are also feeling heat. I suppose a multi-pronged strategy is the requirement of the day, and that's what India is going today. India is not a soft power. India can now look after its own interest. Gone are the days when we were on the mercy of others. Maybe that these incidents of what is happening even in Pakistan, or majority of them are gang killing, but certainly we have given them an indication. If anywhere any terrorist which can now trying to be do anti-India activity, he will not be safe. Either we come after them or whosoever come, but they are not safe. So the point today is what happened in 1985 can be repeated, but they know it. If it is repeated, how India is going to react very, very strongly. India has a muscle power, India has economic power, India has military power, and that has made a tremendous impact. I suppose the weightage which is given by the US also. Remember that when they were saying that we were involved in killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, we told Canada, give us the evidence. And same way, once they are saying GS Pannoon, we have unofficially also conveyed to US. What happened to of Major General Soleimani, which you have eliminated Irani journal in Iraq? What happened to Al-Jawahari, which you eliminated in Kabul? What happened to Osama bin Laden? You have eliminated in Abbottabad. Did you take permission of these countries? So don't dictate terms with India. In any way, India is not involved in such type of killing. India does not believe in doing this. But certainly we are not a weak nation. We are not a soft nation. So I suppose that message is loud and clear. What happened earlier in 1985 cannot be repeated. We have a place of power in the world today. We can dictate. And especially both Canada, US or UK, they need India more than India needs them. So they understand this. I suppose the message is gone loud and clear. They are going to act against these terrorists. If they are not going to act, the loss is there. And certainly, Khalistan will never become in India, but it can become in Canada. In case if they not stop this activity in Canada, the time is not far off when there will be a problem within the Canada itself.
Right, Major General. Let me go to, in fact, to Sanjay Lazar. Sanjay Lazar, you know, it's been a 4-decade battle, personally coming to terms with the tragedy and then pursuing this case in India as well as in Canada. How much of a strain it has been on you? I know it cannot be put into few words, but it's been a very difficult life journey for you. Can you unmute your this thing? I think your thing is muted.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Varghese. Before I go on, I just want to make 2 quick points that I heard Ambassador Gupta and Professor Karnad talk about. One is USA's involvement. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but I think I told Anthony in the documentary. But 15 days prior to the bombing of Kanishka, the US Secret Service visited Parmar in Canada, along with the RCMP. Now this shows that they had clear and evidence of something that the Khalistanis were planning to do. Also, they've listened in on the current Nijjar and Pannoon recordings of the diplomats. So I strongly believe that there could be a mole of the CIA or the intelligence agencies within these organizations. And they're very, very clear of what was happening, and they could have warned us, but they didn't. That's the one point. The second point on financing, it's not only the Gurdwaras. You must understand these Khalistanis are a very small percentage of even the Sikhs in Canada. They're not Sikhs, these are terrorists. They currently run drug trade. They are a monopoly in the drug trade in Canada that runs from Mexico through California, Colombia, and it comes up to Vancouver. So that is one of the major sources which neither the US nor Canada seems to be cutting off. Now, coming back to the Kanishka tragedy and my battle, it's been 38 years of long battle. Let me tell you in no uncertain terms, there is no country in the world that takes 15 to 20 years to bring charges against terrorists when such a big bomb blew up and killed 329 people in the Atlantic. We had Justice B.N. Kirpal and his inquiry, which completed in 7 months. The bombing took place in June. The Indian government appointed Justice Kirpal in June. He was in the Delhi High Court at that time. His expert committee sat down from September onwards, and they rushed the report. They went to Canada, they went to Ireland, they collected evidence, and they presented a report by the next year, by 1986. Okay, so it didn't take 20 years. The evidence was handed over to India and then to the RCMP in 1986. They took till 2005, 2003 really, to bring charges against these guys. In the meantime, evidence had been destroyed, people had disappeared, witnesses were killed, everything was wrong. We then fought for an inquiry and we got the inquiry. And now we see that the entire government system in Canada has, decayed at its roots and is allowing radicals. People in Canada have forgotten about the Kanishka bombing. People in India have forgotten as well. And it's I consider it my duty as one of the victims of this bombing amongst the other families to remind the world that this happened, and we cannot forget. These are lessons that the world has to learn. These are lessons that we in India and in Canada must learn. This was the worst act of terror until 9/11, and even till today, it's the worst act of aviation bombing in history. So let's never forget. I'm writing on this subject, and it'll be out in the coming year. So hopefully this will be a testimony to the people who have died and to all people who've lost their lives to terrorism.
Well, that is in fact quite deepening, that you're keeping this memory alive for the generations in India as well, that we less forget what happened with Kanishka. It's a tragedy that should be etched in our memory, just like how 26/11 was. Before that, we had Kanishka, so that is something that we need to keep. We have Ambassador Yogesh Gupta also with us. Ambassador, we've seen the diplomatic challenges with the current government in Canada. We have seen how they are unable to take any sort of action because they are politically dependent on it. But we have taken action in certain ways of trying to apprise them of the situation. But still, it seems that diplomatically, we've not been able to push it through. What is that Western interest that keeps Khalistani issue alive and giving shelter to these radicals seems to be an interest point for them?
The United States and some other countries, they sort of keep this policy of double-faced policy, that you try to support a rising power on one side, but at the same time you try to keep some levers in your hand to bring it down. They did the same thing with China. When China was rising in the 1990s, towards the end of 1990s, Bill Clinton administration had started supporting India in the hope that India could be used against China. They are doing the same thing. They want to support India on the one hand, on the surface, but at the same time, they want to retain some of these levers to bring down India, to make sure that India's attention is diverted to different issues, whether it is Khalistani or it is Pakistan or it is other issues. So this is basically their strategy of balancing of power, of trying to dissipate your energies, trying to divert your attention from development to other issues, trying to keep you weak. So it's all that.
Well, we also have Bharat Karnad, Emeritus Professor, National Security Studies, CPR. You heard what Ambassador had to say, that it is a strategy to keep your attention and focus away from your development goals. And these fault lines is what they keep exploiting. But then what could have been a response powerful for this? Because we have seen how the Khalistani movement has in fact destroyed a lot of lives. It has resulted in the death of a Prime Minister, and even now, they seem to be openly coming out and saying, like Panoon came out and openly said that not to go by Air India. He made an open threat and not to go by Air India, and says that it could be dangerous for your lives. When evidence is so much out there, stopping these organizations within their territory seems to be as an interest-prone thing. What more can India do? We are also limited by territorial issues. So what more can India do about this?
Well, look, I think we have restricted the embassy strength, the High Commission strength in Delhi, with which the beginning. I think what we need to do also is that the remaining Canadian diplomats have to be surveilled whenever they, say, meet with any suspected Sikh Khalistan sympathizers anywhere in India. They need to be surveilled. And, of course, keeping tabs on them then, in a sense, deters them from doing things of this kind. And the government of India has also restricted visas. That should continue, virtually in extremis, meaning even the slightest reason for doubting any visa applicant from Canada, you should err on the side of caution and deny it. In fact, that could be a virtually blanket ban, unless you make an exception for one or two persons, that sort of thing. So the idea is to so de-link the Khalistani movement or whatever there is, this drug and dope runners and gun running businesses and these criminal enterprises in Canada that, in a sense, uphold the Khalistani movement in these countries, again, supported by a very small minority of Sikhs in these countries. You therefore have a means of restricting them. And you have the kind of means that we have through the FATF, where we can see how there are terrorist financial flows from criminal gangs and criminal gang activities to terrorist acts and so on. And insofar as Panoon and these blowhards issuing public threats, I think one of the reasons they are acting up in this very public way is because they do feel they are under the gun, and it's a good thing for them to always look over their shoulder, because you never know what's going to come at them. I don't think whatever the US may say, or what the Canadians, even less, because they really don't count, they're a minor little power, whatever they may have in mind to do will be of any concern. Though one thing that India needs to do with the US is this: you cannot allow Washington to compartmentalize things, meaning they're quite happy to have security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, but they're completely unwilling to see our point of view and act on information that's available to them from their own agencies, keeping tabs on these Khalistani extremists. And if they don't act on it, and if in some ways they encourage such activity, then it's detrimental to India's national interest. And we should make it clear to Washington, whichever administration is there of the moment, that will not be tolerated. The security cooperation is not a one-way street. That either you're going to have, complete cooperation, or we are going to have none. You are not going to get leverage if you think you're going to have it with Khalistan, and we will not, agree to your notions of democracy and human rights when you yourselves are perhaps extreme violators of these very precepts and principles in your relations with other countries. So the thing would be to remind them not to ride their moral hobby horses and to lecture us, because that'd be very easy. We could, put up our moral, high. We can climb onto a moral high ground.
Just to add to it, when Trudeau came, he defended the Khalistani Association, what we would call as, he went on to say that they have freedom to express themselves and they have to protect the freedom of their citizens. But freedom to issue open threats, that's a question, isn't it?
No, but again, this is the real problem. They have a very loose definition of freedom of speech, as you perhaps are aware. Both in the US and in Canada and UK and so on. Now it's a fungible thing. If the Canadian government, say, doesn't get its FTA, its relations are, thinned out to nothing, and they begin losing out, and the American interest begins hurting in terms of the China threat as they see it, India's non-participation in an active sort of way. And then the UK government sees that, again, the FTA, which is hanging fire, Delhi will not go through with it, that we have counter leverage that we can apply. Then they'll begin to act in their own interest to contain the Sikh extremist threat within their countries. So it's their lookout. If they want to have bad relations with India, that's their call. But equally, we're not going to sit around doing nothing as we did in the past. And we are going to end up, restricting their diplomatic access. We could shut down the embassies, cut it down to 5 people. We could do anything we want. They could respond. We'll be very happy to do that because they lose out. So that's the way to go.
Right. Major General Ashwini Sawach, I'll give you the last word on this. We have seen suggestions coming using diplomatic as well as a flexing of our military muscle as well, if possible. And this is the kind of suggestions that are coming in. But when everybody seems to have forgotten about the Kanishka bombing, as Sanjay Lasar was in fact saying, there are a lot of lessons that we shouldn't forget from history. Don't you think that Kanishka bombing is also one that we shouldn't ever forget from history?
Absolutely. You see, working no doubt, we have learnt a lot of lessons from Kanishka bombing, and certainly India tried to put pressure on Canada, but it didn't work out. And Canada did not cooperate with India, and Canada refused to take action against those who were involved in Kanishka bombing, and they had an intelligence input, yet they have not taken any action. The reason is simple, their own domestic politics. And the same thing is playing now, that presently Justin Trudeau is in the crutches. He is taking the support of New Democratic Party of Jagmeet Singh, which is pro-Khalistani activist. So therefore, there is no doubt about it. But certainly what has happened is the time has changed. India is no more a pushover. We have a muscle power. We can also, put pressure on them. As we discussed that we are a 5th largest economy, 4th largest military power. They need India more than we need them. And therefore, if they do not try to play the way we are telling, or they do not take action against these Khalistani terrorists, which are operating openly both in more in Canada than in US, we have a lot of leverage. And very rightly brought out, if you talk about US only, that they know it, in case any country which can challenge the hegemony of China in South Asia, it is India. And also that we are very important member of Quad, which say freedom of action, free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific. And therefore, we can say that we cannot be with you every time in case you are not taking action against Khalistan terrorists which are operating in. You can't show us eyes. We are no more the same soft power. I suppose the US has also understood it. We are not going to accept this nonsense. And the point is, today all these Khalistani activists are not Indian citizens. They are citizens of US and Canada. If they are threatening India from their soil, it is their responsibility to take action against that. If they do not take action, we must also counter it. We have a diplomatic and government-to-government pressure which must be put at all stages.
Right, Major General. Thank you for, in fact, speaking to us. Thank you, gentlemen, for, in fact, speaking to us. That's all the time that we have on the show. Lest we forget Kanishka. Kanishka is a huge part of our history, and we shouldn't forget about what happened to the crew as well as the passengers on that aircraft that was blown up by the Khalistani terrorists. But that is a wrap on this special program. Stay tuned to News 9 as we continue with news and updates.
Pakistani spy agency ISI's sinister plan to target India. Training women to honey trap top civil and military officials. Counter honey trapping ops initiated by